Welcome to the Just Third Way podcast, where we ask the question, would you rather own or be owned? Brought to you by the Center for Economic and Social Justice at cesj.org. Hello, thank you for joining us again on the Just Third Way podcast. Today we have an interview performed by Sasha Miltreiger of Dr. Norm Kurland. Sasha is a political science major at the University of Alberta in Canada, and she is now a CESJ intern. One of her research projects is to develop a comparison matrix of the universal basic income, the Austrian school, and just third way approaches for how people will be able to earn a living in the age of the robot. So I hope you enjoy Sasha's interview of Norm. Have a good week.
So I have been thinking about some of the glossary terms that are shown on the CESJ website, and just from my preliminary readings of the Capitalist Manifesto and looking at what Aristotle said about work, one of my first questions that I'd like to lead into is about the significance and the difference between subsistence work versus leisure work, and how this relates to the just third way and what the early Aristotle teachings say about it.
Right. Human beings have to work. The only question is, do they work because they love what they're doing, or do they work because they need to do that to survive? So we have labor, as the term is normally used, as the work to meet your animal needs, while leisure is a term we use to say it's the work that if you could meet all your animal needs, your needs for survival, you would do because you would love what you're doing. Now, that's the work for the common good, for others, not just for yourself. So if we are beyond being other kinds of animals, then we understand that human beings have social needs, they have political needs, and what Maslow called self-actualization, where you reach your highest order of potential. And so when we distinguish between labor work and leisure work, we think that what the just third way is able to do is create or recreate the system in a way in which everyone can move from the necessity of economic work to the kind of work that they would love. And that's where academia really has to rethink its views on economics.
All right. So, and leading towards that, is it academia's job to introduce this new theory of work and say to people that it's not just about sustaining yourself, it's not just about survival, there's more to working than just fulfilling your animal needs?
Well, I think it is academia, because academia is supposed to help you pursue the truth. And if the just third way represents a system of political economy in which human beings can understand the truth of work, and if the present understanding is that you get a degree in order to get a job. So in other words, academia, instead of pursuing the highest order of human needs, is really limiting itself to the lower types of work. And if robots and artificial intelligence and other technologies can perform what human beings used to do, why not let them perform them in a way in which civilization itself can be better? So I think the purpose of academia is to promote the truth and not promote something that was misunderstood in the past. So they need definitions of terms that would help students understand what the reality is of the kinds of work that people should be doing. Academia should be teaching the truth and not part of the truth. and not truth which is perverted. And I believe it's perverted in economics. It starts in economics. And the Just Third Way is a new approach that goes beyond the existing paradigms, whether you call it monopoly capitalism on the right, and then socialism, communism, collectivism on the left. No, we have to create a system in which the state begins to establish justice, not the state becomes the source of our economic needs. It was never invented for that. And yet that academia never challenges the role of the state. And so as a consequence, what we find is that the problems of the world, whether we look at war or whether we look at the problems of climate change, or we'll look at the problems of violence, crime. We're not addressing the world in such a way that we minimize these problems and maybe even be able to structure our economic and political systems in such a way that human beings can be fully human.
All right, so just back to the concept of economics in terms of work. I would agree, people are obviously going to school to get degrees in order to get careers after they're done. But is there a way to reconcile work that is done for leisure and work that is done for subsistence? Do they have to be separated, or can it be work? Can you love what you do yet earn wages off of it that will sustain you and your family?
Well, I think some people can, in fact, get paid for work that they like, but if that same kind of work could be done not for pay, it would, and more people could engage in the work that they need, not be unemployed or unemployable. You can't have disabled people. Why not children beginning to, from the very start of their education, be taught that they can be an owner. As a matter of fact, I think children understand ownership often better than the adults. How is that? And I maintain that if you ask a child whether whether he has a toy, and if his neighbor or another child wants to take that toy away from him, that child will immediately respond, "That's mine." And that proves that there's something in human beings to want to be an owner. And there's nothing wrong with ownership as long as it doesn't deny others the opportunity to be owners. So again, until academia wakes up and begins to start teaching the difference between productive work and leisure work, and then begins to see that you can produce through leisure work, and you can meet your economic forms of work through ownership of the tools that are replacing human beings in the production of their economic goods and services, then we're going to maintain those problems will not be eliminated, they'll not be minimized, and I maintain that the purpose of education is to teach the truth. And if we start with that, then there should be no problem. Academia can help educate everyone in the world and to a new concept that is happening, and it's been gradually happening, but now it's at an exponential rate. This is the challenge to academia, and then we'll have better politics, we'll have better health, we'll have better education.
All right, so in some sense, is there a way to begin enjoying this leisure work at the same time, or as maintaining this work that you do just for subsistence, or would some people have to spend a certain amount of time at the beginning of their life, maybe a decade or two, making these economic profits?
I think I think you're right that there are always going to be some people who are going to be, and there should be some people in there making sure that we are not being that our masters are not the information technologies and robots. We shouldn't be the slaves of the robots. So I think the human beings are going to have to work out ways in which they'll always be involved in the process. However, it can move from 40-hour weeks to 20-hour weeks to 10-hour weeks or whatever, and the rest people can then engage without having to be paid for it. And I think we should look at a future where teachers will have economic independence through ownership of capital and the income that it would provide. And this can be done without having to take anything away from the existing owners. We can move from a class-divided society and class-divided world into a classless world society. And that, again, comes down, yes, you can, to answer your question again, it's a process of how do we increase the amount of time we can spend in leisure work and decrease the amount of time that we spend in economic work. And it would be good for people to have some experience in the process of production. So it wouldn't eliminate all kinds of jobs.
Okay, and then I just had another question that came up, going back to the concept of ownership and starting with children. Is there a way that you can reconcile this age of the robot and age of automation with ownership in terms of people not becoming controlled or alienated from their work, but becoming owners of robots, I guess?
Right, that's the thing. Either we own the robots, or eventually the robots will become our masters, or those who own and control the robots. The important thing is power, and we know that power tends to corrupt. So therefore, the only way you can reduce the corruption in the world is to pulverize power, and power follows property. Daniel Webster was right on that. But there's nothing wrong with power, but it cannot be concentrated, or we have the kind of world we're living in today where more and more people are divided. We're looking for a world where more and more people are united, and united in justice, with an understanding of justice. And as some of us frequently say, it's unfortunate that the best of the law schools do not teach justice. They teach you the law within an unjust world, but they don't give you the principles that Kelso and Adler and Patricia Kelso were able to write about, so that we can work in the productive area, yes, but we want to work in the leisure work area as much as possible, because that's the kind of work that you would do if you were free, and if your education helped you understand that you could, that every person, and we're all different, if every person could develop the skills necessary to be fully human, to reach their ultimate potential. That's what education has to look at. How through learning principles, learning the truth, that's what education is supposed to do. And if it isn't doing that, and I claim it is not, as long as it sticks within outmoded paradigms of political economy.
So in a sense, there's been a devaluation of these liberal ideas and teaching of theology and philosophy,
exactly.
And the importance of this. Yeah,
exactly. As a matter of fact, the term liberal means you should be free, and if you're not free, as most people in the world are today under wage slavery, as I say, and welfare slavery, charity slavery, consumer debt slavery. It's the structure of the world that's unnecessary. So we can free all the slaves of today so that they can become owners and have power and true freedom. Not freedom to do wrong, but freedom to do what's good for others besides yourself.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's everything I had to include, but you did have some quotations to
I thought it's
well.
I think it's important that we define these terms, and one, we're talking about Kelso and Adler, which I think the first book is very revolutionary in terms of political economy and moral philosophy. It was called the Capitalist Manifesto, but it actually, Kelso and Adler later went away from using the term capitalist, but it was written at a time where America was there were people on the right, Joe McCarthy, who was calling anyone who was calling for a reform of economics, calling them communists, and so but Kelso was addressing something in Karl Marx in the Communist Manifesto, and that was, if we read Marx, we can see that Marx was against monopolization of ownership, and he called it, as a matter of fact, Marx and the socialists invented the term capitalist, which is a way of saying if capital are things, then that's thingism. So Marx was very clever in saying these people who are promoting things over people, but his idea was to be against this monopoly. But then you read the Communist Manifesto, and it was clear that Marx was saying, he said that you can summarize our entire philosophy in a single sentence. This is in the Communist Manifesto. Abolish private property. And many people don't understand what private property is. It isn't the thing you own, but rather it's your rights and powers and privileges, and even the limitation on those rights. And also, that is the right of control, but the right to the fruits of what you own. Kelso said, Marx, I agree with your statement against monopolization or monopoly capitalism. But Kelso said, well, why not have everyone own? And so the publishers of the book by Kelso and Mortimer Adler said they insisted on calling it capitalism, and so they used the term capitalism, universal capitalism they call, everyone an owner, not monopoly ownership. And it's a brilliant book, and in that book there's a chapter on the question that you posed. It was economic freedom and economic property. It was chapter 2, and I have to. It was property and leisure, economic freedom, property and leisure, and in that it was clear that they said it says for the first time in history it has become possible for all men to have enough free time to engage in leisure. It may be difficult for our contemporaries to understand that labor and leisure are the two main forms of human work, and that the first is for the sake of the second. Freedom itself is only a means. Freedom can be squandered and perverted, as well as put to good use. Only if freedom from labor becomes freedom for leisure will the capitalist revolution produce a better civilization than any so far achieved, and one in the production of which all men will participate. And then in the third book by Kelso, the next book, by the way, was called The New Capitalists, and in that Kelso went into some detail on how you could finance that world in a very sound way, and that way was first allowed into law because but it was focused on what was called employee stock ownership plans, which Kelso designed the first one in 1956. And that, it proved that the financing that enabled workers to get bank credit to purchase companies, 100% of the companies away from the present owners, was feasible. It worked. And we've done examples, as the first one was that I happened to be involved in. It was called South Bend Lathe, where we saved 500 jobs. But that one was not all bank credit. Half of it was bank credit. But the second one, Mid-South Building Supply here in Springfield, Virginia, was all 100%. First, where a local bank supplied all the money necessary for the workers to buy the company, and it's 100% owned by the workers, and it's considered, that was the first in history. The point that I'm making is that you can go to this example and say, if it could be done, as described in the second book by Kelso and Adler, through credit, bank credit, that would be insured bank credit, anybody can get that in order to become an owner. So every child, woman, and man in the world, if you design the global monetary system that way, or for the nation through the Federal Reserve, which has the power to do this under existing law, it doesn't use the power, but you would enable everyone to become an owner of the growth capital needed to make the economy work.
And those first two books by Kelso and Adler are available on the CESJ website.
Yes, exactly.
Full versions of them. Yeah.
They're both free downloadable. The third book is not. That was through Kelso and Patricia Heder, who later became Patricia Heder Kelso. It was initially called, it had a terrible title initially, How to Turn 80 Million Workers into Capitalists on Borrowed Money and Other Proposals. But later, the publisher decided it was not so wise a title, and they called it, and it's a much better title, Two-Factor Theory, The Economics of Reality. And in that, you have a chapter which deals, and I would urge the listeners who are trying to understand the difference between productive work and leisure work, chapter 19 of that, which you can see if you go to the quotes section on our website at www.cesj.org. Chapter 19 is on the law of the urgent and important. And let me just read a few paragraphs to help the listener to hear it from Kelso and Patricia Kelso. It said, human affairs are governed by a dual hierarchy of values, each corresponding to one of the two sides of man's nature. The priority order of particular activities on these table of values is inverse, so that an activity that occupies first place on one is in the last place on the other. Man is an animal, and his animal needs and wants are the subject matter of economics. But he's also a spiritual being with a mind unique in the natural order. He is a civilized or human being. It is from the dual nature of man as both animal and human that the dual scale of values governing his life arises. One is a hierarchy of urgency, that is the economic work. The other is a hierarchy of importance. The history of man, at least as we read it, leaves no doubt that he places the highest value on the goods of the mind and of the spirit, what Plato called the wares of the soul, that in the human scale of things, It is the goods of civilization, the arts, the sciences, religion, education, philosophy, statesmanship, and the like that weigh the heaviest. Despite much particular evidence to the contrary, man's civilization as a whole testifies to that truth.
So I have a question. Is there a way to begin with this leisure work or begin with this work that is for a higher purpose, basically from the beginning of when you begin working, or is it better to work for a decade or two, gain that economic independence, I guess would be the word?
Let's think about that. Mm-hmm. Let's say there's somebody who loves to teach. Mm-hmm. And the process that we call the just third way and the methodologies and changes in the institution and laws, the money system changes, mm-hmm. so that that particular person or many people like that man or woman who's capable and loves to teach were already set up so that they didn't have to take any pay. Mm-hmm. They might be willing to do that work. Well, some of them may take $1, mm-hmm. $1 a year, mm-hmm. And just so that people would say they're part of the workforce. Yes. So the more we can get people doing the work they love. The same thing goes if people are affluent and can meet their economic needs without having to get paid for their work. Would they do it? I think so. If our mm-hmm. education system points out and helps them see how much more satisfying it is to do things in leisure work is just and the spiritual work that people will do, not because of the economic needs. So we should look at what Kelso and Adler talked about, or actually it was what Kelso and Adler talked about in the Capitalist Manifesto for people who are interested. You know, they can find Chapter 13 on property and leisure. Chapter 13, and as a matter of fact, the key pages sufficient is page 18, 19, and 29. See if they go to that, and they can get to that by just going to the www.cesj.org website.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Norm. I think that's everything we had. Thank you for listening, and thank you for speaking with me.